Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave, your man behind the screen, and I would like to welcome you all to our first Unearthed Arcana review, starting with the most recent Unearthed Arcana, the Giant Soul Sorcerer. So before I get started, I'd like to ask that, again, forgive the clutter behind me. We're still in the process of getting this room put together, but fortunately, we've almost got my wife's room squared away after that flood. We've got new flooring in. We just need to get the molding in and touch up some of the paint, and then we can start moving a lot of this stuff back into her room, and then finally get started on getting this office put together properly. So, the Giant Soul Sorcerer, as I'm sure you can figure out by what's on the screen here, is a new Sorceress Origin for the Sorcerer class in 5th edition D&D. Brand new Unearthed Arcana, only came out a couple of weeks ago. Would have liked to have reviewed it when it came out, but unfortunately didn't really have the time for that. But we're here now. So before we get started, I'd like to clarify what it is that I'm going to be looking for, that I'm going to be using to determine whether or not the Giant Soul Sorcerer works effectively as a good Sorceress Origin. Whether what Wizards has included in here is actually going to be useful, whether or not it's going to actually adhere to the class fantasy, and most importantly, whether it actually appears like it would be fun, especially in comparison to the other Sorceress Origins. So to do this, got our 5th edition Player's Handbook right here, and we have bookmarked one of the two original Sorceress Origins. The only one of the two original ones that I feel was worth a damn, because let's face it, the Wild Magic Origin is an RNG-filled absolute mess and a nightmare, and really just felt more like Wizards was trolling us than providing us with something legitimate. So we will be comparing it largely to the Draconic Bloodline. And yes, I am using a card from my plumber who fixed my water heater as a bookmark. Whatever you can, right? So, what we're going to be looking for is a few things. First and foremost, we want to make sure that the Giant Soul Sorcerer fits well with the Sorcerer's class fantasy. We want to make sure that the Giant Soul Sorcerer's own individual core fantasy as an origin is effective. We want to make sure the Giant Soul Sorcerer comes off as mechanically effective. Do the mechanics involved in the individual abilities make sense? Do they work together? Do they build off of each other to make for an interesting origin that feels worth taking? Or is it disjointed? Or what sort of problems might we run into with it? We want to look at all of that. And lastly, we want to compare it to the Draconic Origin, the Draconic Bloodline, as that is in my opinion, the core Sorcerer Origin. It sets the best baseline for a Sorcerer Origin, not only because it is one of the original two Sorcerer's Origins, but it's the only one of those two that was actually effective. And it hits, as far as I'm concerned, the Draconic Origin hits all the marks. It adheres to the Sorcerer class fantasy of being a class, a magic-using arcane class that draws its power from mysterious origin somewhere in the Sorcerer's past, somewhere in their lineage. Its own class fantasy as an origin, or its own origin fantasy on its own, is interesting and fun to work with. The abilities it provides are effective. They are fun to use. They work with each other. And most important of all, the abilities and everything provided affect the class in a positive way. So our comparisons largely are going to be between not only what the Giant Soul Sorcerer provides in terms of how it works within itself, how it works within the realm of adhering to the core fantasy of the Sorcerer class and the core fantasies of the various origins we've received since then, but primarily the Draconic one, because that one nails it the best, but also whether or not it's actually going to be comparably effective. So let's take a look. And obviously, Sorceress Origin, like every Sorcerer Origin, you take your Sorceress Origin at the first level. Giant Soul. The giants once dwelled in a fabled realm known as Astoria, a paradise for their folk reflected in their mastery of the mortal realm. In time, Astoria fell, and the giants were scattered and broken. During that mythic era, the giants granted a few chosen individuals among the small folk a shard of their great power. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. Unlike the Draconic bloodline, where you have somewhere in your ancestry a relation to a dragon, the giant soul origin is an actual portion of the power of the giants. Ancient giants took a portion of their own arcane power, their own magical prowess, and gifted it to the small folk. So it literally is a power embedded in your soul, which works pretty well, and it gives actually the Origin's name a good tie into this Origin fantasy. So not bad overall. These favored people were caught in the same tragedy that sundered the story. All right, so that's pretty interesting. So a lot of these people probably fell in that tragedy as well. Since that time, they have spread across the many worlds of the multiverse. Now and again, one of their descendants manifests the gifts imparted by the giants, granting them sorceress magic that allow them to command the elements and gain the might of a giant. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So based on the blurb, at least, we've got a pretty cool idea of what they're trying to go with here. So the idea here is somewhere in your lineage, a giant gifted a portion of its inborn power to one of your ancestors. And then that power manifested again in you. Now, how and why that happened is going to be based largely on you as the player developing that in your backstory. Or GMs, if you're using that as an NPC, it's going to be based on you developing that for the NPC. But the interesting thing here, I find, is that the ancestor that you're taking this from probably also died or got caught up in whatever it was that sundered and caused Astoria to fall. So you have the potential there, just like with most sorcerers, you have the potential there to kind of explore this deep history with your character, which I have always loved. That's one of the reasons why sorcerers are actually my favorite arcane class, is they've got that inbuilt fantasy that digs deep into their lineage and really can provide you with a cool, personalized story if your DM is willing to follow that as sort of a side story, or even potentially as the main story for your group. That could be part of why you guys are exploring to begin with and adventuring. But what's pretty neat is that we get the idea of, how basically the general idea of how this origin is supposed to affect the class. You're not only going to be imparted with, magic that is thematic to the different varieties of giants, but you're going to potentially be able to gain a portion of their physical prowess as well. So it seems like part of the goal here is to give a little bit more of a blend of physical and magical combat for sorcerers. Now, as a sorcerer, it's probably still going to lead much more towards magical combat, but if we'll take a look in here, and if there's a way that Wizards has found a way to effectively blend the two together, I think that would make for a really awesome origin. So let's take a start at the first ability, Jotun Resilience. The resilience of the giants flows your... excuse me. The resilience of giants flows through your body. At first level, your hit point maximum increases by 1, and it increases again by 1 anytime you gain a level. Okay, so you gain 1 extra hit point every level. And that's it. Okay. Well, that sucks. Literally right after we get so excited over this pretty cool blurb for the Giant Soul that, seemed awesome, we've already run into a problem. Jotun Resilience is literally just half of what Draconic Resistance gives. Draconic Resilience, which, again, I'll read it for you here for those unaware. The Draconic Bloodline, one of the original 2, gives you this following ability. Draconic Resilience. As magic flows through your body, it causes physical traits of your dragon ancestors to emerge. At first level, your hit point maximum increases by 1, and increases by 1 again whenever you gain a level in this class. just like Jotun Resilience. But additionally, parts of your skin are covered by a thin sheen of dragon-like scales. When you are not wearing armor, your armor class equals 13 plus your dex modifier. So Draconic Resilience not only gives you this exact same health bonus, but it gives you an armor bonus when you're not wearing armor. Which, let's face it, most sorcerers probably aren't wearing armor. So already, the class fantasy of the Giant Soul is harmed by the fact that the Draconic Bloodline does the exact same thing, but better. So that's kind of unfortunate. That's something that I think Wizards would definitely need to look into and maybe make a change to. It even could be something as simple as, giants are supposed to be grand and hardy. Could be as simple as your hit points increase by 2 instead of 1. That way, yeah, it's still not as engaged, still not as interesting as the Draconic one, but you're leveling out that playing field a little bit more. Let's move on. Mark of the Ordinate. At first level, you discover innate magical abilities within yourself that are based on your giant heritage. Select one of the giant types from the Mark of Ordinate table. At first and third level, you learn spells associated with your choice as shown on the table. These spells count as sorcerer spells for you, but they don't count against your number of sorcerer spells known. All right, so that sort of reminds me actually of the, what was it called? The like with clerics, when you pick your divine, I cannot believe I am forgetting what that's called right now. I'm just totally blanking on it. Your domain. Yeah, as clerics, you get your special domain spells. Now, the cleric domain spells go up a broader level, but I can understand the sorcerer ones being learned in a different manner, only going first and third because of the fact that these are permanent spells that you're going to learn. The domain spells, like all other cleric spells, you have to prepare. You still do have to prepare them. I do believe. Well, no, I don't think you have to prepare them, but they consume your spell slots as normal. So it's similar to the domain spells, not quite as good. But let's take a look here. So Cloud Giants, you get Fog Cloud and Minor Illusion at level 1, and then Invisibility at level 3. So that's pretty cool. Fire Giant, appropriately Burning Hands and Firebolt, followed by Flaming Sphere. Cool, but I'm not as wild about these first two. Like, while cool, I'm pretty sure these are all spells that you can get as a sorcerer anyway. It is kind of neat getting them for free, but it would be interesting would have been kind of cool if you could get something that wasn't necessarily from the sorcerer spell list. But, free spells are free spells, and those are useful spells. So, Frost Giant. All right, that's pretty cool. First one the Frost Giant gets, Armor of Agathis. So, a Warlock spell. Pretty neat. Ray of Frost. Then, Hold Person. That's pretty awesome. That's a pretty powerful spell for, to get for free. It's obviously still going to count against your spell slots for the day, but since sorcerers do get limited selection of spells, even if it is from their own spell list, free spells is still cool, so I'm still kind of into this. Hill Giant. Heroism and Shillelagh. All right, so working into that, combination of, at least with the Hill Giant a bit with the spells, working into that combination between physical combat and spell-based combat for the sorcerer. And then Enlarge Reduce. Makes sense. Stone Giant, Entangle and Resistance. And then third level, Spike Growth. Interesting. And then Storm Giant, Shocking Grasp and Thunderwave. And then at third level, Gust of Wind. So, pretty neat. You get, 3 free spells over the course of your first 3 levels as a sorcerer. Would have been cool if they had expanded a little bit beyond just the first 3 levels, but, I kind of understand part of the fantasy of the sorcerer is that your selection of spells is supposed to be a little bit more limited, so that's all right. Just one moment here, going to take a sip of water. So not bad overall. Would have been neat if it gave a little something more, but overall, not bad. And curious how well the Hill Giant spell selection, since that one, the Hill Giant is really the only one whose spells kind of reflect that idea of combining ranged and combining spell and physical combat. Would have been nice if the other ones could do that well, but all of these are appropriately thematic for the different types of giants, so I'm okay with that. Hill Giant, although it's the one that comes closest, is probably my least favorite, but, you know, it's all right. So, 6th level ability, Soul of Lost Astoria. Starting at 6th level, you gain a benefit whenever you cast one of the spells granted by your Mark of the Ordinate feature. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Anytime you cast one of the 3 spells granted by your Mark of the Ordinate, you get some free abilities. So let's see. Cloud Giant. Immediately after you cast any of your Mark of the Ordinate spells, you can magically teleport as a bonus action. You can teleport to an unoccupied space that you can see is no farther away than a number of feet equal to 10 plus your Constitution modifier. All right, kind of interesting. Thematically, it makes sense to go off the Constitution modifier since you are a giant, or well, your magic comes from the giants and their ancestry. But it kind of leads me to thinking of there might be a little problem here, and that being that if this and we'll reserve our judgment for a little further, but if this Unearthed Arcana really is about combining ranged, or not, I'm sorry, not ranged, spell combat and physical combat, then you're going to need, for one, you're going to need your spellcasting stat, which for sorcerers is charisma, to be good so that your spells are effective. You're going to need one of the physical combat stats, either dexterity or strength, and if it's giants, most likely looking at strength to also be pretty decent, to be effective in that way. And now, actually just kind of skimming over the next couple of these, do all of these work off your Constitution modifier. So now you also need a decent Constitution score to have this effect work. So Sorcerer has just been turned into a MAD class by this. For those unaware, MAD is an acronym that stands for Multi-Attribute Dependent. So you would need, at least so far, a decent Constitution and a decent Charisma score for this to really be effective. Now, that's not too bad on its own. Again, we'll reserve judgment. Like, I'm kind of guessing that based on the fact that of the blurb that, part of this thing is, oh, you want to gain the might of the giants, that it seems like, okay, you're kind of trying to blend some physical combat in there too. We'll wait and see. But, all right, so the Cloud Giants is interesting. I am curious how that teleportation thing is going to work. 5-foot increments are usually what are handled in 5th edition. In terms of movement, it's usually done on the grid. So if your Constitution score is, or your Constitution modifier is not a multiple to 5, how are you going to determine exactly how many feet you're teleporting away? Are you rounding up? Are you rounding down? That's usually how it works. Some clarification there would be really nice. But let's move on. Fire Giant. You gain a bonus to the damage rolls of your Mark of the Ordinate spells. The bonus equals your Constitution modifier, minimum of 1. Okay, so that's cool. So even if you don't have a good Constitution, you will always get that minimum of 1 extra damage on each of those spells. Obviously nothing special, but kind of cool. That sort of more directly ties this ability in with the previous one, which I do like. It does lead me to think the power of this might be a little on the weak side, but I'll reserve judgment and compare to... I'm going to reserve judgment for now, and we'll compare to the Draconic Bloodlines shortly after we've looked at this. Frost Giant. Immediately after you cast any Mark of the Ordinate spells, you gain temporary hit points equal to your Constitution modifier with a minimum of 1. If the spell is Armor of Agathis. You increase the temporary hit points by an amount equal to your Constitution modifier. All right, so that's kind of interesting. Basically giving yourself a little bit of a shield. Hill Giant. Immediately after you cast any of your Mark of the Ordinate spells, you can target up to 2 creatures within 5 feet of you that you can see. Each must succeed on a strength saving throw against your spell save DC or be pushed a number of feet away equal to 5, plus your Constitution modifier, minimum of +1. Okay, again, how a target can choose to fail this save. So, okay, so yeah, if you're like targeting an ally and want to push them towards an enemy, or they want you to push them towards an enemy, give them that extra boost of movement before their turn, you can use it for that. That's cool. I do like that. However, again, this Constitution modifier for movement, a bit of a problem because movement's usually handled in 5-foot increments. So are we rounding up or are we rounding down? What's going on with that? Stone Giant. Immediately after you cast a Mark of the Ordinate spell, you gain a bonus to your armor class equal to your Constitution modifier until the end of your next turn. That makes you a little bit harder to hit for 1 turn. That's okay. You know, it could be useful. Storm Giant. Immediately after you cast a Mark of the Ordinate spell, up to 3 creatures that you can see within 30 feet of you take lightning damage equal to your Constitution modifier, a minimum of 1. All right, that one is cool. That one I think actually is probably my favorite of the 3. You know, it's the most active, it's the most interesting. You get to pick up to 3 different creatures to have that happen with. That kind of fits with that fantasy of, you know, being a giant of storms, commanding lightning. You cast one of your spells, and oh, look at that. Here comes a little lightning bolt striking 3 random enemies that you've decided on. So that's pretty neat. But see, I'm running into another problem here in terms of the power level. These only work with your Mark of the Ordinate spells. We've only got 3 each, which again, you know, I was saying, oh yeah, you know, it's pretty cool. I mean, I still like this idea of the Mark of the Ordinate spells, but now I am leaning again more towards the idea of they probably should have given a few more. I know that part of the Sorceress class fantasy is that your spell selection is more limited, but your 6th level ability directly works with the Mark of the Ordinate. Which means if it directly works with Mark of the Ordinate, it's only going to work with 3 of your spells, and they're all 3 lower level spells. Now, you could always expend higher spell slots to get better effects, but that doesn't feel that great to me. Compare that with Elemental Affinity, the 6th level ability of the Draconic Bloodline. Starting at 6th level, when you cast a spell that deals damage of the type associated with your dragon ancestry, you can pick any one of the 10 types of core base dragons for your dragon ancestry. It's got the damage type associated with each. Anytime you deal damage associated with a dragon ancestry, you add your charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of that spell. At the same time, you could spend 1 sorcery point to gain resistance to that damage for 1 hour. So that works with a lot more spells. And really, the only draconic ancestry that gets shafted there is the green dragon. And that's because for whatever reason, and this was always my one big complaint about the draconic ancestry for the dragons you pick, the green dragon damage type is poison. There are hardly any spells whatsoever that deal poison damage specifically. Gaining resistance to poison damage is alright, but that's not really very difficult to do, even with the changes to how poison works in 5th edition compared to prior editions. That's still not that hard. So the green dragon has always been really weak comparatively, at least in my opinion, for the Draconic Bloodline. But all the other ones, you know, you could either get acid, lightning, fire, or cold damage, which are all very common. There's a lot of spells that do damage of each of those types. Acid is probably the least common of those. Most of the spells that deal damage of that type are lower level, Lightning, fire, and cold are definitely the most common of those three. Fire especially. But, there's still enough choices there that you get a good number of spells that you can use this ability on. It's really cool, And it's anytime you do that, you can add your charisma modifier to that damage. It's not much like your Soul of Lost Astoria. Anytime you cast one of your Mark of the Ordning spells, anytime you cast a spell that deals that damage with Elemental Affinity, you gain your charisma bonus. You can gain your charisma bonus on a damage roll with that spell. If you, for whatever reason, don't want to deal that extra damage, like you're trying to hurt something but keep it alive, you can opt not to do that. You also get that bonus of being able to spend the sorcery point to gain resistance to that damage for up to an hour in game. That's really good. That works with so much stuff that you get as a sorcerer. Soul of Lost Astoria, I love that it works with a prior ability, but now I am convinced, because of how that works, it's just blatantly weaker than than Elemental Affinity is. So the primary way I would say to fix that is either have those effects happen with your Astoria spells plus spells of the type that your giant is. So like Cloud Giant would be Cloud and Frost Giant. If you use cold spells, you get the bonus. Fire Giants, obviously, fire spells. Lightning Giant or Storm Giants would be lightning spells, and then Hill and Stone Giants would be spells that deal acid damage. That's one way you could do it, or give them more spells to learn through Mark of the Ordinate. That would be what I would prefer. Is like if you want to keep it limited to specifically your Ordning spells, you need to give them more spells that they can use than just 3. Otherwise, you're not going to be making as effective use of these abilities, especially since some of these spells don't really work well with the Ordning spells. Hill Giant, for example, that's one I can definitely see being a problem. Because if you're casting Shillelagh to give your weapon, a magical bonus, well, you're not going to want to knock people away from you if you're trying to hit them with your weapon. It goes counter to what the spell gives you. So that's another problem. Well, let's move on to the last couple abilities. 14th level, Rage of Fallen Astoria. Starting at the 14th level, you gain the ability to channel the souls of your ancestors into your physical form. When you start casting a sorcerer spell on your turn and expend a spell slot, you can increase your size by 1 category, from medium to large, for example. This increase lasts for 1 minute. It ends early if you die or incapacitated. Until it ends, you enjoy the following benefits. Current hit points and maximum hit points increase by 1 per sorcerer level. Pretty neat. You gain 5-foot reach. That's interesting. That'd be pretty nice for touch spells. If you're using Shock and Grasp, for example, which I believe, I remember, yeah. So if you're the Storm Giant and you're using your Shock and Grasp, well, now you can reach out over an ally to Shock and Grasp something. That's pretty nice. So touch spells, that's useful for. Your walking speed increases by 5 feet. Not bad. You have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. Okay. That right there tells me for sure what I was talking about with MAD. They are focusing, like I kind of suspected, on you want to be able to be physically powerful as well, like a giant. And the next one just further solidifies that. You gain a bonus to the damage rolls of your melee weapon attacks. The bonus equals your Constitution modifier, minimum of +1. You can only use this feature once per short or long rest. Okay. So, all right. So this is an interesting ability. I do like it. I love the fact that it works with any sorcerer spell, and it's any time that you expend a spell slot. So that I like. I love that this works with all your sorcerer spells. This can be used with anything. So you could potentially do some really interesting stuff with this. I mean, it looks like you could potentially make a pretty cool, if you can find the spells to make this work, you can make an interesting self-buffing sorcerer and turn yourself into sort of a spell-casting melee character, but at that point, it's almost like you're playing a war priest. So I would say at that point, why not play a war priest? Because I would almost imagine a war priest can more or less do it better, but that's just based on my first impressions reading this stuff. But yeah, the strength checks and strength saves, and then damage being based on your constitution. I love actually that the damage bonus is based on your constitution. That ties right back in with the previous abilities, from the Soul of Lost Astoria. Your constitution is coming into play, but now they have definitely turned this into a mad uh, origin. You need 3 stats for it to really be effective. You need good charisma for your spells, good constitution for these bonus abilities, and for your health. If you're presumably going to be fighting in melee in part with this class, which is what it looks like, and then you need strength to reap the benefit of the bonus strength checks and to be able to actually hit effectively with your weapon to make use of this damage bonus. So the fantasy of it is interesting. It's fitting for a giant, but so far it does not seem to effectively accomplish what it's setting out to accomplish. But let's take a look at the last one. Blessing of the Allfather. At 18th level, your constitution score increases by 2 up to a maximum of 22. In addition, you can now use Rage of Fallen Astoria twice between rests, but no more than once a turn. If you use that feature while under its effects, it increases to your size, hit points, reach. Oh, it increases to your size, hit points, reach, and walking speed are cumulative. Okay, so you can double up on the previous ability. That's cool. I do like that. Constitution increase of 2. That's nice. That's helpful. I would almost say I wish that came earlier so that you can get more benefit from it. Because at 18th level, that's really late to be getting that bonus. And your constitution score, your constitution modifier rather, starts coming in to your abilities at level 6. So as a capstone, that's really, really underwhelming. Let's look at comparison. So for level 14, for the Draconic Bloodline, you gain Dragon Wings, which allows you to sprout a pair of wings from your back, gaining a fly speed equal to your current speed. You can create these wings as a bonus action. They last until you dismiss them as a bonus action on your turn. This must all be on your turn. You cannot manifest while wearing armor unless it's made to accommodate them, and clothing not made to accommodate your wings might be destroyed when you manifest them. Okay, I mean that's all right. It's a very utilitarian ability, which actually I do like the fact that that's the more utilitarian ability. And in a lot of ways, Rage of Fallen Astoria is utilitarian as well, but it definitely seems like it is a little bit more meant to be used as a combat ability. So all in all, though, Dragon Wings and Rage of Fallen Astoria, I think they're about equal. I think they're all right. And then Draconic Presence at level 18. Beginning at 18th level, you channel the dread presence of your dragon ancestor, causing those around you to become awestruck or frightened. As an action, you can spend 5 sorcery points to draw on this power and exude an aura of awe or fear, your choice, to a distance of 60 feet. For 1 minute or until you lose your concentration, as if you were casting a concentration spell, each hostile creature that starts its turn within this aura must succeed a wisdom saving throw or be charmed if you choose awe, or frightened if you choose fear, until the aura ends. A creature that succeeds on the saving throw is immune to your aura for 24 hours. Okay. That is so much cooler. So much cooler than Blessing of the Allfather. Active ability, yeah, it costs a lot of sorcery points to use it, but an active ability, an active radial ability that you can use to either strike awe or fear into your enemies, versus 2 points of constitution, and oh, you can use the level 14 ability twice between rests now. This is so disappointing. this whole thing, actually, pretty disappointing mechanically. And in terms of the class fantasy, even. Rage of Fallen Astoria, I think, is probably the coolest ability you get here. The individual Soul of Lost Astoria abilities are neat. Um, the best one is Storm Giant by far in terms of the class fantasy and how interesting it is. It's not even a contest that Storm Giant is by far the coolest and most interesting one. But this does not. This is a neat ability. It does not work with your class. Um, there's nothing here that really helps you mix the use of your spells with the use of melee attacks. And since cantrips in 5th edition work in the sense of, or they work as constants, you never expend them. You can always use them. It's like in Pathfinder. I believe Pathfinder started that. Um, it's not like 3rd and 3.5 edition where you had a limited number of cantrip casts. If that was the case and all your spells were more limited, Rage of Fallen Astoria would be more interesting. And it would work a little bit better because that would provide you a pretty decent backup. Granted, it wouldn't come until 14th level, but once you hit that point, that would provide you with at least some backup to be able to fight in melee. But that's another problem. If you're building this giant-based sorcerer and you want to combine melee and spells, well, Rage of Fallen Astoria is the best way to help you do that. Even then, it's not particularly good at it, but it's still the best way. However, there's nothing in it that really helps you weave your spells with melee attacks. It's just cast a spell, grow giant, start hitting shit. This is pretty disappointing overall. I was hoping it would be better than this because I love the idea of drawing your power from the giants. I think there needs to be something in here that encourages you to actually combine, or that enables you to combine the physical aspect with the spell casting aspect. Now, before I had read this, I had heard, rumors that there was this problem. I was hoping it wasn't the case, but, I had heard around the grapevine that this did have this problem. So I'm not entirely surprised. I'm still disappointed that it was actually true, but I'm not entirely surprised. Um, I'm not really sure what can be done to fix this. I mean, I guess you could potentially, since Constitution is so important, you could reduce the mad aspect of it by making Constitution your casting stat. But, I mean, I don't really like that as a solution because that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. To me, that just seems like odd. Like, okay, why is it that a physical attribute is giving you your spellcasting ability? And you could say, oh, it's because your ancestry is from the giants. And, okay, fair enough, but the magic comes from the souls of these lost giants, the portion of their power that they took out of themselves and gifted to the small folk. So, all in all, I like the idea overall. I do not think this was executed particularly well. Now, I might be wrong. This might play fantastically, but I personally suspect that this is going to feel very, very disjointed in play. A lot of this stuff is not going to come into play for most people who are playing the Sorcerer. Most Sorcerers are not going to make use of this damage bonus. Most Sorcerers are not going to make use of this strength check advantage. Now, there are going to be situations where it will be useful, but the problem is you need to cast a spell before you can even make use of this. So if you're in a situation where you need to make a strength check, but you can't cast the spell, and you want to get your advantage on that strength check, well, I mean, you're boned. If you can't cast it, you don't get the advantage. And you know that's an issue where you could say, oh, well, I mean, that's based entirely on the game, blah blah blah. So, yeah, that's true, but the whole point of having advantage on the strength check and strength saves is that you'll be able to use that to get out of those problems more easily. But a lot of the situations I can think of where you'll need to make those checks, you're going to have a difficult time casting those spells. Now, sorcerers do have meta magic, which can help them do that, and that's going to be huge for helping you get benefit out of this. But overall, this is not great. It's okay. I mean, it's all right, but all in all, a lot of this feels really disjointed and I almost said Blizzard. Excuse me, like Wizards wasn't entirely sure how they wanted to put this together. So, all in all, it's meh, not great, not horrible. It's certainly nowhere near as bad as Wild Magic. I could still definitely see a lot of these abilities having use, but there's a lot of details here that really need to be worked on. There's a lot of details that need to be hammered out and fixed before this is ready to go. Because as it is, even though it's not the worst, I'd still say this is not good enough to really be worth playing, especially in comparison to the Draconic Origins. I would honestly just say, if you want to play something that has a similar fantasy, even though its abilities aren't as individualized and aren't as unique as the different giant abilities are, all in all, you're going to get more usefulness, you're going to get more effectiveness, and you're going to get generally a more satisfying play style and class fantasy, I would imagine, out of just playing the Draconic Bloodline. So that's about it. I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to actually go ahead and I'm going to fill out the survey and share my thoughts with Wizards, and hopefully with the help of the community, we can figure out how to make this this idea work. Because I do think the core idea is really good. I love the idea of playing a sorcerer that is based on the bloodline of, or based on the power of the giants. Because that's something that was never really touched on. You know, Pathfinder, when they included the sorceress bloodlines, you had dragons, of course, you had genies, you had elementals, and all sorts of different things, but I don't believe they ever did giants. And with the variety of giants that are in the game, it makes sense that you could make some really cool stuff from giant-based origin. But this, I think, came out too clumsy. It reads like Wizards really loved this idea, wanted to make it work, but then when they sat down to do it, they weren't really sure how. So that's all I've got for you today, everyone. I hope you found this video to be interesting and useful. If you did, please leave it a like and feel free to subscribe or follow me on social media. Links, as always, are in the description down below. What do you guys think of the Giant Soul Sorcerer? Do you think it's worth the time? Do you think it works as it is? Or do you think I'm right and that the abilities are a little bit too disjointed to actually be effective? Let me know in the comments below, and please feel free to share this video around. Part of my goal here on this channel is to share the many years of knowledge I've acquired over my long time playing this hobby with all of you. But I can't do that if my videos aren't out there, so I would ask that you please share it around if you found that it's worth your time. That's all I've got for you today, folks. As always, it is my sincere hope, friends and gamers of all stripes, that you roll high, role play well, and ever continue to game on. Have a good one.